In 1950, the world was still healing from World War II, but on the Korean peninsula, a new fire was about to ignite. Once liberated from Japanese occupation, Korea was split in two at the 38th parallel. To the north, communism, backed by the Soviets. To the south, democracy, supported by the West. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces stormed across the border. Seoul fell within days. The South was collapsing under the weight of invasion. The United States had to act. President Truman ordered immediate intervention. General Douglas MacArthur led a daring counter-offensive. From the last defensive line in Pusan to a bold amphibious landing at Incheon, the tide turned. American and UN forces pushed north, past the 38th parallel, aiming to reunify Korea. The further they advanced, the less resistance they met. But that calm was a trap. Lurking in the frozen mountains beyond the Yalu River, an invisible army waited. China was watching. And it was ready to strike. The road to Chosin Reservoir had already begun, and it would soon become a frozen hell. As US and UN troops pushed deeper into North Korea, victory seemed near. The skies were clear, the enemy was in retreat, or so they thought. But in the icy mountains near the Yalu River, over 300,000 Chinese soldiers were already in motion. Under cover of darkness, they crossed into North Korea, silent, stealthy, and deadly. American commanders believed China wouldn't dare get involved. They were wrong. Chairman Mao had already given the order: crush the Americans, drive them into the sea. The trap was set. The U.S. 10th Corps, including the legendary 1st Marine Division, advanced toward a frozen lake, Chosin Reservoir. They were overextended, undersupplied, and exposed on all sides. Then, the snow began to fall. And the Chinese struck. 12 Chinese divisions encircled the Americans. Outnumbered 2-1, surrounded in temperatures that dropped to -28 degrees Celsius. The Marines faced not just the enemy, but the wrath of winter itself. The hills echoed with the sound of whistles, trumpets, and battle cries. Wave after wave of Chinese soldiers crashed into American lines. There would be no reinforcements, no easy escape. Only one order remained: hold the line or die trying. Perched on a windswept ridge overlooking the icy Chosin Reservoir, Fox Company, 7th Marine Regiment, dug into the frozen ground. Only 246 men. Cut off. Surrounded. In order to hold a narrow mountain pass, the only escape route for 8,000 fellow Marines still trapped to the north. It was December 2nd, 1950. The night was dark, the air razor-sharp with cold. Then came the sounds. Whistles, trumpets, screams. The Chinese attacked, again and again. Wave after wave, charging up the slopes, Fox Company was outnumbered more than 10-1. Men froze in their foxholes. Wounded Marines kept fighting, firing with numb fingers and bloody faces, but they would not break. Captain William Barber refused to retreat. His men had one mission: hold this ground no matter the cost. Over 5 nights, the hill turned red with blood and black with smoke. Bodies piled in the trenches. Ammunition ran low. But still, they held. Behind enemy lines, help was coming. A relief column crept through the snow-covered ridges, and on the 6th day, when all hope seemed lost, Fox Company was saved. But their stand would become legend. With Fox Company's heroic stand, the escape route opened. But the nightmare was far from over. Thousands of Marines and soldiers still had to break out from Hagaduri, marching south through narrow mountain passes, choked with snow and enemy fire. The road to Humnam Port, 78 kilometers away, wound through valleys watched by fresh Chinese divisions lying in wait. Every hill, every turn, every tree line hid an ambush. And yet, they moved. A convoy of 15,000 men, 1,000 vehicles, and countless wounded. Fighter jets screamed overhead, Corsairs, Mustangs, Sky Raiders, strafing ridgelines and blasting Chinese roadblocks with napalm. Behind them, engineers raced to repair roads and bridges, often under sniper fire. One bridge, blown apart by the enemy, spanned a deep, icy chasm. Retreat was impossible without it. With no supplies, U.S. engineers improvised. Prefabricated bridge parts were dropped by parachute from the sky. Working through a blizzard, under fire, they rebuilt the crossing, using wood, metal, even enemy corpses for support. By December 11th, the last units reached Hungnam, frostbitten, bloodied, exhausted. But they had survived. Not a rout, but a fighting withdrawal that would echo through military history. The Battle of Chosin was over, but the Korean War was just beginning. The survivors of Chosin didn't march out in victory. They limped, they bled, they carried their dead, but they had defied the odds, fighting through the coldest winter against overwhelming numbers in the most brutal terrain imaginable. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a defeat either. It was a miracle of discipline, firepower, and sheer will. The 1st Marine Division lost 4,000 men, dead, wounded, or frozen. Task Force 31 was nearly annihilated, yet the U.S. forces managed to withdraw in good order, inflicting tens of thousands of casualties on the Chinese. Historians would later call it one of the most successful tactical retreats in modern military history, but for the men who lived it, Chosin was frozen hell. The name Chosin Reservoir became etched into Marine Corps legend, a symbol of unbreakable spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest, coldest nights, honor can survive. To this day, those who endured the battle call themselves the Chosin Few, and they will never be forgotten. Before Chosin, U.S. commanders believed the war was almost over. General Douglas MacArthur had promised victory by Christmas. But at Chosin, that dream froze solid and shattered. The United States had underestimated China. They assumed Mao wouldn't dare send troops. They assumed Soviet permission would be needed. They assumed wrong. The Chinese not only entered the war, they entered with strategy, stealth, and fury. And they taught America a brutal lesson. Never mistake silence for weakness. MacArthur's push to the Yalu River stretched U.S. lines thin. Troops were overextended, supplies were low, flanks were exposed, and the brutal Korean winter was unaccounted for. General Oliver Smith, commander of the 1st Marine Division, warned them. But Washington didn't listen. The result? Chosin. After the battle, Truman rejected MacArthur's plans to bomb China. A long, grinding war replaced what was meant to be a quick campaign. Chosin changed the war. It forced the U.S. to fight smarter, to respect the terrain, the weather, and the enemy. It wasn't just a battle. It was a wake-up call. On the frozen ground of Chosin, Marines fought with rifles, grenades, and bare hands. But overhead, another battle raged. The skies belonged to the Allies. From aircraft carriers offshore to runways in Japan and South Korea, fighters and bombers launched nonstop, day and night. Corsairs, Sky Raiders, Mustangs. They dove into mountain passes, strafing Chinese columns, blasting roadblocks, and dropping napalm with deadly precision. The air was the only lifeline. Cargo planes dropped food, ammo, medical supplies, and even bridge parts. Helicopters evacuated the wounded. Without the airlift, there would have been no escape. But victory came at a cost. Ensign Jesse Brown, the U.S. Navy's first black carrier pilot, was shot down during a support mission. His wingman, Thomas Hudner, crash-landed beside him in a desperate rescue attempt. Brown died in the snow. Hudner would earn the Medal of Honor. Their story became legend, just like Chosin itself. Air power didn't win the battle, but it made survival possible. In a place where trucks froze solid and blood turned to ice, the sky stayed warm with fire, and from above came hope, delivered on wings of steel. While the headlines spoke of Marines and MacArthur, they weren't alone at Chosin. Alongside the Americans were 700 South Korean soldiers, fighting for their homeland with everything they had. Poorly equipped, lightly dressed for the brutal cold, but they stood their ground, and many never returned. From across the world, others had come too. The British Royal Marines, tough, experienced, and relentless, they joined the breakout through Hellfire Valley, where Chinese machine guns tore through trucks like paper. Only a handful made it through. One British commander described it plainly. We went in with hope. We came out with silence. UN forces from nations like Australia, Canada, and the Netherlands supported the wider campaign, often in the shadows, but never without sacrifice. At Chosin, the world bled together. Different flags, different languages, but one shared fate. These weren't just battles for strategy or territory, they were battles for survival. And though their names rarely appear in textbooks, the allies who stood at Chosin earned a place in its legend. They were more than soldiers, they were brothers in arms, frozen together in history. After weeks of blood, ice, and fire, the survivors of Chosin reached Hungnam port. They were broken, frostbitten, exhausted, but they had made it. Behind them, the mountains still burned with gunfire. Ahead, the sea and salvation. But this evacuation wasn't just for soldiers. Tens of thousands of Korean civilians, fearing communist revenge, had fled south with the retreating Americans. There wasn't enough room, there wasn't enough time. And yet, they made it happen. Between December 10th and 24th, the U.S. Navy launched one of the largest sea lift operations in modern history. Over 100,000 troops and 90,000 civilians were evacuated from Hungnam under constant threat of attack. One cargo ship, the SS Meredith Victory, took on over 14,000 refugees without losing a single life. It's been called the greatest rescue by a single ship in human history. As the last ship sailed away, U.S. forces destroyed the port behind them, leaving nothing for the enemy. Hungnam wasn't just an escape. It was a symbol that even in war, mercy can prevail. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir didn't decide the war. It didn't end in victory. But it became something greater. A legend. It exposed the limits of American power. It humbled generals, rewrote strategies, and forced the world to see the Korean War for what it was: a brutal, grinding, and global conflict. For the men who survived it, Chosin never melted away. Even decades later, they could still feel the cold, still hear the whistles, still see the faces of brothers who never came home. They called themselves the Chosin Few, not for glory, but because only a few made it out alive, and even fewer ever forgot. Military academies now study Chosin as a masterclass in leadership, withdrawal, and courage under fire. But in the hearts of the veterans, it was simply hell on earth. A place where discipline met chaos, where brotherhood was forged in ice, and where human endurance was pushed to the breaking point but never broken. Chosin is more than history. It's a memory, a warning, and above all, a testament to the cost of freedom. The Battle of Chosin wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a test of the human soul. In frozen mountains, surrounded and outnumbered, men didn't just fight. They endured. They bled, froze, and died so others could live. They wrote their story not with ink, but with fire and ice. And long after the war faded from headlines, Chosin remained, etched in scars, medals, and memories. This is more than history. This is sacrifice. This is brotherhood. This is Chosin.